Today my guest is Mads Torgersen. Mads, how are you?
I'm good, how are you doing?
Would you please say your name in Danish for me?
Mads Torgersen.
Okay, I'm not going to try it.
Don't even try.
And you've got a cool job.
Thanks.
What is your job?
My job is to be the PM for the C# language.
Oh.
So one of the half boring part that I kind of enjoy is to maintain the language spec and so on. But I also run the design meetings where we have Anders Heilsberg and Eric Lippert and others and myself noodle with what should be the exact shape of the next features of the language.
Okay, so you've been working on this for several years. The version you've been working on has been going on for a long time. But yesterday, Visual Studio 11 beta just dropped.
Yes.
So now you're finally getting it out to the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this is an exciting time for you.
It is. Yeah, we've had the main feature of the new versions of C# and VB. The Async feature has been out in CTPs for more than a year now in various versions. So we kind of had a lot of reaction to that already,
right.
but this is sort of this is where people can really start to use it. This is the serious version.
Okay, people download this. They can install it. First of all, you can install it side by side with Visual Studio 2010, right?
Possibly. I don't know.
Okay, all right. I'll try it later on today.
Yeah, try it and see. Let me know if you can't.
All right. But when people install it, what are they going to see? What are the most important features?
Visual Studio in general?
Studio in general, or maybe the language as well. Let's start with the language.
Well, let's talk about language. That's what I can talk to.
Well, let's look at the syntax here first. Visual Studio 11 is the IDE, and then with that you get C#5,
C#5 and Visual Basic 12, and F#3
and .NET 4.5.
.NET 4.5.
Okay. There was a time we were trying to line those numbers up.
We've accidentally lined up C# and .NET a couple of times.
Okay.
They've been out of alignment before and again.
Okay. So C#5 we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right.
Just to confuse.
All right. So what are the cool features of C#5?
Well, so Async is definitely the main feature.
Okay.
It's a feature that that takes the pain out of writing asynchronous code. Pretty much, it's the case now more than ever that you really need to write responsive apps in an asynchronous fashion. It's already been the case for a while in Silverlight, say, that you could only do things like go on the web and so on asynchronously, and so you had to write your code correspondingly. And Windows 8, which is coming out with a consumer preview coinciding with VS, has the Windows runtime that is also completely asynchronous and forces you to be asynchronous whenever you're doing something that might take longer than a certain number of milliseconds. So it is really imperative now that people write asynchronous code. And at the same time, there are more and more things that can take longer than 30 milliseconds because you go on the network all the time. Any app is network bound. So that would all be fine if it was easy to program asynchronously, but up till now it hasn't been. It has been really hard. You have to completely break up your usual control flow, the way that we think as people programming in an imperative programming language. You know, you have all these constructs to help you structure the order of execution of your codes, your while loops and exceptions and conditionals and all kinds of stuff that give you neat structure. We've had like 50 years of language evolution to help us with that, and that's all down the drain when you do asynchronous programming.
Right.
Except now we've made it so it's not down the drain. You can keep using all those features, and you can keep using the same approach and the same way of thinking about structuring your code. And the hard part of the asynchronous programming is sort of done by the compiler behind it.
Okay. All right. These are the things like the await keyword.
The await keyword that does that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I said we actually had Kevin Pilchbasson on the show over a year ago, so very early on in the CTP, talking about how that thing worked. It was pretty interesting. It doesn't look like it's changed a whole lot. My understanding is that the under the hood, it's still compiling to the same code as before. It's just making it easier for us as developers.
Not exactly the same code, but it's the same kind of code, if you will, that is callback based.
Okay.
So it's all about removing the callbacks from your surface level code and encoding those in the background.
I see. Okay. All right. What else? What else is new?
Well, so we did reveal another little language feature yesterday. It's not on the same scale as Async in terms of usefulness, not even close, but it's still one that's going to help a lot of people. We call it caller info, and it's a little feature that lets you get hold of information that the compiler has at a certain point in your code. So You can get the line number and the file name and the name of the member you're in, whose definition you're in at a certain point in the code.
Okay, what's the usefulness? Is that for logging errors or?
Logging is a really big scenario for it. Another big scenario that people have been bugging us about forever is things like notification. I notify property changed, so you want to notify that a given property changed. That interface requires you to pass the name of the property as a string, and whenever you have a hard-coded string that needs to be in sync with a name, an identifier in the code, that leads to all kinds of problems. You refactor your code, you change the name of the identifier, you forget to update the string. And that's a maintenance nightmare. But now you can just get that name from the compiler, and it will give you the right name at runtime. And so you, with very little, actually, you don't have to say much at all. You get your code to be refactoring safe and maintainable. So. Logging and I notify property change, that's probably the main scenarios for that. Okay. Logging is really important when you do. We have more and more things like in Azure you have post-mortem debugging scenarios and so on, and so logging is really more and more important. Where was I in the code, all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I think so for the async stuff, let me talk more about that, because that's what I get excited about every day. It's much more than just a push in the language. It's really been a push across the platforms and the frameworks and so on. So we've really revamped a lot of our frameworks to be asynchronous, to expose asynchronous.
We say a lot of our frameworks, like for example what?
Let's see. Pretty much all of them. Like you look at the core frameworks, like all the file interaction stuff has all been.
Okay, so the core CLR that we're getting with .NET, so
right.
The data access libraries, the file access libraries.
Exactly, and all kinds of things like streaming, XML, all kinds of stuff. The new HTTP client framework is completely asynchronous as well. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. This is, I'm not sure, it's version 5, but it's actually been more than 5 releases of the language. This language is getting really mature. It's been around for 12 years now. Yeah. At what point do you continue to add features to this thing? Is it?
Well, we add a feature every time we feel that it adds more value than it subtracts, right? Adding features to language is a serious thing because they're going to stay there forever. We can't take them out, and we kind of expect the language to not get bigger than a developer can have the whole language in their head. We don't want to have a language that's sort of where people live in a subset of the language because they can't grasp the whole thing. So we have to be really careful about adding new things, and there might come a day when, okay, we just can't do it anymore. But as long as we can find things that have really high value, as long as we can follow new trends, such as, web development is a new trend, and solve a large new set of problems for developers, we will keep adding features.
So I was thinking that the really awesome features, you probably like 12 years ago this conversation took place, we need to add more features to it, and you came up with a long list of features and you couldn't implement them all.
Sure.
So I said, let's just take the really cool ones as long as they're doable, and we'll put them in the next release. And then the release after that was the next most cool one. Eventually you're going to get down to the not cool features.
Yeah, that's what you think.
Nobody really cares about. Or are new features just kind of inventing themselves based on the environment?
That's a funny thing. You'd think that if the world was static, and you were solving the same problems today in development that you did 12 years ago, that would be the case, right? It would sort of be just flushing out until you're like, nah, we can't be bothered anymore because those are just little things. But the world keeps changing and new things keep coming to the focus. People develop very differently now than they did when C# came out.
Okay.
So we keep realizing that new things are now important, new things are now getting in the way of developers. And there's an endless supply, apparently, of problems we can tackle next.
So what's cool today may not have even been on the radar 10 years ago.
That is true. I'll tell you, we never even contemplated asynchronous features, for instance, 10 years ago.
Interesting.
Back then we were starting to, when generics came into the language, which has really been the big lever that's let us do all the subsequent features, we were starting to think about, maybe something with database programming. Maybe we can get people off of SQL and actually do their queries in the language. And that's what then in the next release became the big feature in the shape of LINQ, language integrated query. And then, dynamic stuff was getting a big resurgence, and that came out of the blue. Nobody would ever have expected there to be a dynamic keyword in C# at its inception time. But then that became really relevant, and now people are using it more and more to do all kinds of cool stuff that we didn't even think of when we
Interesting. Okay. So let's get people on this Visual Studio 11. Where can they find it?
Well, it's up on the web on MSDN. You can just download it and install it and start playing with it and doing stuff with it. And I didn't want to say so C# is one thing. That's my language, and Async is the main thing there. Visual Basic is doing a little more. In particular, it's getting iterators that C# has already had.
Okay.
We should also mention F#, which is our third .NET language.
Okay.
And F# actually has a bunch of cool innovation in this release. And one thing that makes it particularly worth noting is that we've often been inspired by F#. It's sort of been the spearhead language that has tried out new things and been remarkably successful with them typically, and sort of helped inspire the next thing for the more mature languages, if you will. And so it's really worth watching what F# is doing this time. And one of my absolute favorite features ever is the feature they call type providers. I'm really amazed by that feature. It lets you hook what they call a type provider into the compiler at compile time. And what it does is it's a little piece of code that you write, a little model that you write, if you will, of something out there in the big world. A model that lets you represent that as a type to the compiler, or as a set of types. So for instance, you can find some structured data on the web, and you can write a type provider for it. Or you can look at a table in XML with headers and stuff, and you can write a type provider for it. You can present it to the developer as if there was a whole set of types written for it.
Okay.
So it's they're kind of sham mock types, if you will.
So when you say types, I think class.
Yeah, classes of data. And so they present themselves to you through IntelliSense. You can dot your way through this data as if it was written in F# or C# as a library.
So if you have a hierarchical data structure, you can use
exactly.
syntax to
and so you get total IntelliSense and type checking and everything. So you can write these strongly typed programs against live data that's being contacted by the compiler at compile time.
Nice.
Right?
Okay.
And the amazing thing is that when you then compile your code, it compiles out all those types. They never exist at runtime. They're just used for your design time experience, and it does whatever it takes to actually get to that data at runtime. Right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which is typically untyped and dangerous code that you don't want to write yourself.
Right.
So you get to write strongly typed, delicious, tool-supported code, and under the hood, something ugly that you would have had to write otherwise, that you have to write in C# if you want to do the same thing. That just gets generated for you.
So why is that in F# but it's not in C# or VB?
Well, that's kind of one of the big roles of F# for us, is where we can try this nifty new kind of thing out and see.
There are guinea pigs, huh?
They are guinea pigs, and they love it, right? The F# developers get to do the coolest things.
Interesting.
But then our job in C# and VB is to then look at what of this stuff will fly with a bigger audience, first of all, maybe less specialized audience, and how do we need to tweak it to get it to be more broadly applicable. So we take those learnings, just like, they're guinea pigs, but they're happy guinea pigs, I think. The F# developers, if you talk to them, they're some of the happiest
they're an enthusiastic bunch.
People we have, because they get to party. And sometimes, they try things out. Sometimes we end up taking a different tack on things in C#. For Async, for instance, the feature's different than that's one of the ones that F# went ahead with, right? They had an Async feature in the previous release.
Okay.
And we went and looked at that and saying, that's kind of cool. Let's steal that and let's morph it until it fits our model of our customers, and it turned out a little differently, but at the same time we made sure that it worked really well with the F# Async feature as well. So, I want to really make a case for trying out F# if you want to get a glimpse of the future or a possible future, or you just want to have some fun, and people should try out F# for sure.
I agree. Anything else?
Well, on the language front, we only have those 3 languages, so
Okay. All right.
that's pretty much what's happening. I think you'll see. I mean, there's a cornucopia of new features and improvements in Visual Studio as always, but I'm not the right one to talk about them.
Okay.
I won't do them
We'll
justice.
find that guy today. He's here.
Yeah.
You have a web presence, right?
What's that?
You do a web presence, a blog or something that you
No,
want
not
to
really.
promote?
No.
Okay.
No, haven't blogged in
You're too busy
too
with your
many
day
years.
job, aren't you?
Apparently, yeah.
All right, Mads, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is good stuff.
I ended up working with technology because I didn't have any friends.